The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows of Naval Station Norfolk's main dining facility. Jennifer Blake's combat boots created a soft rhythm against the polished floor as she navigated through the breakfast rush. Around her, hundreds of sailors filled the massive space with conversation and the clatter of silverware against trays. She wore the standard navy blue working uniform, her dark hair secured in the regulation bun that every female sailor knew by heart. Nothing in her appearance suggested she was different from the dozens of other women eating breakfast that Tuesday morning. At 28 years old, Jennifer stood 5'6" with an athletic build carefully concealed beneath her loose-fitting uniform. Her brown eyes moved constantly, automatically cataloging exit routes and potential threats without conscious thought. This perpetual awareness was the product of years of specialized training that most people in this crowded room would never experience, never even know existed. She grabbed a brown plastic tray from the stack and moved through the serving line with practiced efficiency, accepting portions of scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast from kitchen workers who smiled and made small talk. Jennifer responded with polite brevity, having learned long ago that invisibility served her better than friendship in this environment. She chose a table in the back corner of the vast dining hall, positioning herself where she could observe the room while eating her breakfast in solitude. Jennifer preferred these quiet moments alone, using them to mentally prepare for her day while maintaining constant situational awareness of her surroundings. Today would prove different from the routine she had established over 8 months at this assignment, though she had no way of knowing it yet. Today would test everything she had learned during a military career that officially didn't exist. At a table 15 feet away, 4 male recruits were finishing their own breakfast with the boisterous energy of young men new to military life. They had arrived at the base 3 weeks earlier, still adjusting to the rigid structure and discipline that defined naval service. These recruits were young, probably 19 or 20, full of the misplaced confidence that came from surviving basic training. They had been watching Jennifer since she sat down, their voices carrying just far enough for her to hear every word they thought they were whispering. "Check her out," said Brandon Cooper, a tall recruit from Texas with sandy brown hair and a swagger that hadn't yet been beaten out of him by military life. "She thinks wearing that uniform makes her tough." His voice carried that particular tone of mockery that young men use when trying to impress their peers at someone else's expense. His companion, Eric Wang, a shorter recruit from California who had barely passed the physical requirements of basic training, laughed with the forced enthusiasm of someone desperate to fit in. "These women think they can do everything men can do." It's a joke. Eric's own struggles with the physical demands of training had left him eager to prove his worth by diminishing others. The third member of their group, Carlos Martinez from New York, was the smallest of the 4, but compensated with an oversized personality and aggressive posturing. "Somebody needs to teach her about respect," he announced, cracking his knuckles in what he imagined was an intimidating gesture. "Show her what real sailors look like." The 4th recruit, Stephen Kim from Ohio, felt increasingly uncomfortable with where this conversation was heading, but couldn't find the courage to speak against his new friends. His parents had raised him to treat women with respect, but the powerful pull of peer pressure was making him question values he had held his entire life. He shifted in his seat, saying nothing. Jennifer continued eating her breakfast with apparent calm, seeming to ignore their comments while actually processing every word. She had encountered similar situations throughout her military career. Some men struggled to accept women in combat roles, particularly in the most elite units. Experience had taught her to choose her battles carefully, to know when to engage and when to let foolishness pass unremarked. The 4 recruits pushed back from their table and stood up. Instead of leaving the dining facility as most people would after finishing a meal, they walked deliberately toward Jennifer's corner table. Other sailors in the immediate area began noticing the developing tension, though most continued their own conversations while keeping peripheral awareness of the situation. Brandon approached first, positioning himself directly across from Jennifer's table. "Excuse me, sailor," he said with exaggerated politeness that fooled no one. "My friends and I were wondering what someone like you is doing in the Navy. Shouldn't you be somewhere more appropriate, like teaching kindergarten?" Jennifer looked up from her breakfast, her expression remaining neutral and calm. Years of training had taught her that emotional reactions only escalated confrontations. "I'm eating breakfast," she replied simply before taking another bite of her eggs, her tone suggesting the conversation was already over. Eric moved to stand beside Brandon, crossing his arms over his chest in what he imagined was an intimidating pose. "That's not what we meant, and you know it. Women don't belong in combat positions. You're just taking spots away from men who could actually do the job properly." The conversation was beginning to draw more attention. Sailors at nearby tables paused their own discussions to observe what was happening. Some looked concerned, while others appeared merely curious about how the situation would develop. The kitchen staff had also noticed and were exchanging worried glances about whether they should call security. Carlos positioned himself to Jennifer's left, effectively beginning to surround her table from multiple angles. "Maybe you got confused during recruitment," he said with a nasty grin that revealed his enjoyment of the harassment. "The Navy isn't the place for playing dress-up soldier." Stephen reluctantly took his position to complete the circle around Jennifer's table, still feeling deeply uncomfortable but unwilling to abandon his friends and face social isolation. The 4 recruits now had Jennifer surrounded, though she continued eating as if nothing unusual was happening, as if young men trying to intimidate her was just another mundane part of her morning routine. "I think you should apologize for taking a man's position," Brandon continued, his voice growing louder as he sensed he had an audience. "Then maybe you should consider transferring to something more suitable for someone like you. I hear the kitchen staff could use help washing dishes." Jennifer set down her fork carefully and looked up at the 4 young men surrounding her table. Her expression remained calm, but something subtle shifted in her eyes. The casual observer might miss it entirely, but anyone with real combat experience would recognize the transition from relaxed awareness to focused readiness, like a switch being flipped inside her mind. "I'm not interested in having this conversation," Jennifer said quietly, her voice carrying surprising authority despite its low volume. "I suggest you all return to your own business before this becomes a problem for everyone involved." The dining facility was growing noticeably quieter as more people became aware of the confrontation developing in the corner. Some sailors looked ready to intervene while others seemed content to watch events unfold. The kitchen staff were now openly discussing whether to call the military police. Brandon leaned forward, placing both hands on Jennifer's table in a gesture meant to intimidate through physical proximity. "We're not finished talking to you yet. You need to learn some respect for the men who actually belong in this uniform." Jennifer's extensive training took over as she rapidly assessed the tactical situation. 4 opponents, all larger than her, all young and probably strong from recent basic training. They had positioned themselves to block her movement, clearly intending to intimidate her into submission or perhaps provoke a reaction they could use against her. What they didn't realize was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their short military careers. The other sailors in the dining facility seemed to hold their collective breath, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Some began reaching for their phones to call security, while others prepared to either help break up a potential fight or simply get out of the way of whatever was coming. Jennifer slowly pushed her breakfast tray away and stood up from the table, her movements controlled and deliberate despite being surrounded by 4 hostile young men. The dining facility had grown remarkably quiet as more sailors became aware of the tense situation developing in the corner. She was noticeably shorter than all 4 recruits, but her posture radiated a confidence that seemed incongruous with someone who appeared outnumbered and outmatched. "Last opportunity," Jennifer said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed atmosphere. "Walk away now, and we can all forget this happened." Brandon Cooper laughed, mistaking her calm demeanor for fear or weakness. "You're not in any position to make threats, lady. There are 4 of us, and 1 of you. Maybe you should be the one walking away." Eric Wang stepped closer, emboldened by his friend's bravado. "She's probably never been in a real fight in her life. These military women are all talk and no substance when it comes to actual physical confrontation." What the 4 recruits didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that Jennifer Blake had graduated from the Navy's basic underwater demolition SEAL training 18 months earlier. She was among a tiny handful of women who had ever completed the grueling program that broke most men who attempted it. Her official military record listed her as a logistics specialist, but this was merely a cover story designed to protect her real identity and mission capabilities from enemy intelligence gathering. During her SEAL training, Jennifer had endured months of the most physically and mentally demanding military instruction available anywhere in the world. She had learned to operate effectively in hostile environments, mastered multiple forms of armed and unarmed combat, and developed the ability to make split-second tactical decisions under extreme pressure. The 4 young recruits surrounding her had absolutely no conception that they were confronting one of the military's most elite warriors. Carlos Martinez moved even closer, attempting to use his physical presence to intimidate Jennifer into backing down. "I think she's scared," he taunted loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Look at her just standing there like a deer in headlights. She knows she can't handle all 4 of us." Jennifer's training had taught her to read body language and assess threats with remarkable speed and accuracy. She could see that Brandon was the group's obvious leader and probably the most aggressive. Eric seemed nervous despite his words, trying to prove himself to his friends. Carlos was the loudest, but likely had the least discipline in an actual fight. Stephen appeared deeply uncomfortable with the entire situation, but was following along due to social pressure. In her mind, Jennifer was already planning her response if the situation escalated to physical violence. She had been trained to end confrontations quickly and efficiently, using minimal force when possible, but overwhelming force when necessary. The confined space of the dining facility would actually work to her advantage, limiting the recruits' ability to use their size and numbers effectively. "I'm going to give you one more chance to de-escalate this situation," Jennifer said, her voice remaining steady and controlled. "You're all young and you've made a mistake. Don't make it worse by continuing down this path." The surrounding sailors were now openly watching the confrontation. Some had pulled out their phones, though whether to call security or record what they sensed would be an interesting encounter was unclear. Several senior enlisted personnel had noticed the disturbance and were making their way over to intervene before the situation deteriorated further. Stephen Kim was beginning to have serious doubts about his friend's behavior. Something about Jennifer's complete calm in the face of being surrounded was triggering alarm bells in his mind. Most people would show some sign of fear or anxiety in this situation, but she seemed almost relaxed, like someone waiting patiently for something inevitable to happen. "Guys, maybe we should just leave her alone," Stephen said quietly, his voice barely audible over the ambient noise of the dining facility. "Shut up, Stephen," Brandon snapped without taking his eyes off Jennifer. "Don't go soft on us now." He turned back to Jennifer with renewed aggression. "You think you're better than us because you've been in the Navy longer? We're going to teach you a lesson about respect and knowing your place." Jennifer's eyes hardened slightly, the only visible sign of her internal decision-making process. She had tried repeatedly to give them a peaceful way out, but they were determined to escalate the confrontation. Her training took complete control as her mind shifted into combat mode, everything around her seeming to slow down as adrenaline sharpened her senses. Eric reached out to grab Jennifer's arm, intending to physically intimidate her or perhaps force her to sit back down. This was the trigger moment Jennifer had been anticipating. The instant his hand made contact with her uniform sleeve, she moved with lightning speed that caught all four recruits completely by surprise. Jennifer grabbed Eric's extended wrist with her left hand while simultaneously stepping forward and driving her right elbow into his solar plexus with surgical precision. The strike hit exactly the right spot to knock the wind out of him without causing any permanent damage. Eric doubled over immediately, gasping desperately for breath and completely out of the fight before he even understood what had happened to him. Before the other three recruits could process what had just happened to their friend, Jennifer continued her fluid motion. She spun Eric around and positioned him as a human shield while she assessed her remaining opponents. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds from initial contact to complete neutralization of the first threat. Brandon stood frozen in shock, unable to process how quickly the situation had reversed. One moment they had been intimidating a lone female sailor, and the next moment one of his friends was disabled and being used as protection against the rest of them. His brain couldn't reconcile what his eyes were showing him. Carlos's street fighting instincts kicked in, and he lunged forward, trying to grab Jennifer from behind while she was occupied with Eric. But Jennifer had been tracking his movement through her peripheral vision with the constant awareness drilled into her during years of training. She released Eric, who stumbled away still struggling to breathe, and pivoted smoothly to meet Carlos's clumsy attack. As Carlos reached for her with both arms extended, Jennifer ducked smoothly under his grasping hands and swept his legs with a precise kick to his ankles. Carlos's forward momentum carried him onward as his feet were knocked out from under him, sending him crashing into an empty table with considerable force. Trays and dishes scattered across the floor in a tremendous clatter as he went down hard, the wind knocked out of him by the impact. The dining facility erupted in surprised shouts and gasps from the watching sailors. Cell phone cameras were now openly recording the encounter as word spread rapidly through the facility that something extraordinary was happening in the corner. The brief confrontation was already being live-streamed to social media platforms. Stephen took a large step backward, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender, finally understanding that they had made a catastrophic error in judgment. The woman they had assumed was an easy target for their harassment was systematically dismantling his group with combat techniques he had never witnessed outside of martial arts films. Brandon, realizing his friends were being defeated with embarrassing ease, decided to rush Jennifer himself. He charged forward with his fists raised, planning to overpower her with what he assumed was his superior size and strength. But Jennifer had been anticipating exactly this response from the moment the confrontation began. As Brandon approached with his aggressive but undisciplined attack, Jennifer sidestepped his clumsy rush and grabbed his extended arm. Using his own considerable momentum against him, she executed a perfect hip throw that sent Brandon flying over her shoulder. He landed hard on his back on the polished floor, the impact driving all the air from his lungs and leaving him gasping and disoriented. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 15 seconds from the moment Eric made physical contact with Jennifer. 3 of the 4 recruits were on the floor in various states of defeat, and the 4th was backing away with his hands raised in clear surrender. The dining facility fell into stunned silence as everyone stared in amazement at what they had just witnessed. A lone female sailor had decisively defeated 4 larger male attackers with techniques that demonstrated professional-level combat training. Jennifer stood calmly in the center of the chaos, barely breathing hard despite having just disabled 3 opponents in rapid succession. Her training and countless hours of practice had made such engagements almost routine. She scanned the crowd of onlookers, automatically assessing for any additional threats while also gauging reactions from the numerous witnesses to what had just occurred. The dining facility remained eerily quiet for several long seconds after the brief but decisive encounter concluded. 3 of the 4 recruits lay scattered on the floor in various states of defeat, while Stephen Kim stood motionless with his hands raised, his eyes wide with shock and fear. Jennifer Blake stood calmly in the center of the chaos, her breathing barely elevated despite having just neutralized 3 attackers in under 15 seconds. The crowd of sailors who had witnessed the confrontation stared in stunned silence, trying to process what their eyes had just shown them. Brandon Cooper groaned as he struggled to push himself up from the floor, his back aching from the hard impact when Jennifer's hip throw had sent him crashing down. He looked up at her with a mixture of physical pain and psychological disbelief. The confident smirk he had worn just moments earlier had vanished completely, replaced by the confused expression of someone whose entire worldview had just been violently shattered. Eric Wang remained doubled over near a support column, slowly regaining the ability to breathe normally after Jennifer's precisely placed elbow strike had temporarily paralyzed his diaphragm. He had never experienced anything like the incapacitating pain that had radiated through his torso when she connected with his solar plexus. The precision of that single strike had been both educational and humbling. Carlos Martinez lay tangled among overturned chairs and scattered dishes, holding his ankle where Jennifer's sweep had connected with surgical accuracy. The shame of being so easily defeated stung worse than any physical pain he was experiencing. He had talked the biggest game and fallen the hardest, both literally and figuratively. The surrounding sailors began murmuring among themselves, trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. Cell phone videos were already being shared across social media platforms as the incredible footage began spreading through digital networks. Some of the older, more experienced sailors in the room were nodding with recognition, understanding that they had just witnessed professional-level combat skills in action. "Did you see that?" whispered Petty Officer Johnson to his table-mate, his voice filled with awe. "I've been in the Navy for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like what just happened. That woman dismantled 4 guys like they were training dummies." Chief Petty Officer Williams, a veteran of multiple combat deployments, pushed through the crowd that had formed around the incident site. His experienced eyes took in the scene quickly, noting how efficiently Jennifer had neutralized each threat while using the minimum necessary force. He had seen enough real combat to recognize elite training when it manifested before him. Jennifer remained standing where the brief fight had concluded, her posture relaxed but alert. She continued scanning faces in the gathered crowd, automatically assessing for any additional threats while gauging witness reactions. Years of training had ingrained the habit of maintaining complete situational awareness, especially immediately after physical confrontations when adrenaline could affect judgment. "Everyone step back and give them some room," Chief Williams commanded in an authoritative voice that cut through the murmuring crowd. The gathered sailors immediately complied, creating a wider circle around the aftermath of the encounter. Military discipline ensured his orders were followed without question or hesitation. Stephen Kim slowly lowered his raised hands, realizing that Jennifer had no intention of attacking him since he had clearly surrendered. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice shaking with residual adrenaline and genuine remorse. "We didn't know. We thought—" He trailed off, unable to find adequate words to explain their massive miscalculation and poor judgment. Jennifer looked at Stephen with an expression that was stern but not unkind. "You thought what exactly?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet dining facility. "That because I'm a woman I couldn't defend myself?" That I didn't deserve to wear this uniform? Brandon finally managed to get to his feet, though he moved with obvious discomfort and kept one hand pressed against his lower back where he had impacted the floor. The arrogance that had driven him to confront Jennifer had evaporated completely, replaced by the sobering realization that he had badly underestimated not just his opponent, but his own understanding of capability and strength. "We made a mistake," Brandon admitted, his voice much quieter than it had been during the confrontation. "We didn't realize you were—" He paused, clearly struggling to understand exactly what Jennifer was. Her combat skills were far beyond anything he had encountered in basic training or anywhere else in his limited military experience. Eric straightened up slowly, finally able to breathe normally again after several uncomfortable minutes. The precision of Jennifer's strike had been both painful and remarkably educational. He had never been hit with such surgical accuracy, never experienced a blow that incapacitated without causing lasting injury. The experience had taught him more about real combat in 15 seconds than months of training exercises had provided. Carlos was helped to his feet by another sympathetic sailor. He favored his swept ankle, but wasn't seriously injured beyond bruised pride and ego. The shame of being so easily defeated was worse than any physical pain he was experiencing. He couldn't bring himself to make eye contact with Jennifer or any of the other sailors watching the aftermath. Chief Williams stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone present. "Is anyone seriously injured?" he asked in a professional tone that balanced concern with military efficiency. When the 4 recruits shook their heads, indicating they were bruised but not badly hurt, he nodded with visible relief. "What exactly happened here?" the chief asked, though his question was directed more at the crowd of witnesses than at the actual participants. He needed to understand the complete situation before deciding how to handle it through official channels. Several sailors began speaking simultaneously, eager to share their version of events. The consensus was remarkably clear and consistent. The 4 recruits had surrounded and harassed Jennifer. She had attempted multiple times to de-escalate the situation peacefully, and she had only taken physical action when one of them actually grabbed her arm. Every witness account supported the same basic narrative. "She gave them multiple opportunities to walk away," reported Seaman Andrews, who had been sitting at a nearby table throughout the entire incident. "They kept pushing and pushing until one of them physically grabbed her. Then it was over in seconds. I've never seen anything like it." Petty Officer Garcia, who shared the same surname as Carlos but was not related, nodded in emphatic agreement. "I've never witnessed anything like that, Chief. She moved like someone with serious professional training. Those boys picked absolutely the wrong person to harass." Chief Williams turned his attention to Jennifer, studying her with the careful eye of someone who had encountered many different types of warriors throughout his career. Something about her composed demeanor and the remarkable efficiency of her defensive movements was triggering recognition in his experienced mind. "Petty Officer Blake," he said formally, "I think we need to have a serious conversation about your background and training. Those weren't standard Navy combat techniques you just demonstrated." Jennifer met the chief's gaze steadily, knowing that her carefully constructed cover story was about to be challenged by someone with enough experience to recognize the truth beneath the facade. The delicate balance she had maintained between her public identity and her classified role was beginning to shift irreversibly. "Yes, Chief," she replied simply, offering no additional information voluntarily. Her training had taught her to reveal classified information only when absolutely necessary and through proper channels. Operational security had to be maintained even in difficult circumstances.